Another way to use the bright sun is a reflector. You can put the sun behind the subject and use a reflector to put light on your subject. Let's look at this next photo here. You can see a before and after. The first photo is without the reflector and it looks okay, but when you see the reflector added on the second shot, you can see those colors come out a little bit better, the sharpness come out better, and it just has a little bit of pop to it. Now, I didn't have a reflector, so what did I use? I used my simple shoot-through umbrella as a reflector because it's white. And so a lot of times I like using an umbrella because not only is it a diffuser, but it also can act as a reflector if you need it to be, and that's what I did in this situation here. I had the sun coming behind the subject, giving me a nice glow around her hair, and then having that sun hit my shoot-through translucent umbrella, which is white, and then just putting a little bit of catch light into her eye and adding a little bit of sharpness and definition there, which a reflector can do. Now I'm going to a completely different situation here, and this is good to use a reflector in this case when you're going out into the water. You don't want to bring your expensive lighting equipment out in the water because you might get electrocuted. You know why I know that? Because that's what happened to me. I have been electrocuted before bringing out my battery packs, and it's just, sometimes it's not a good idea. So I said, listen, I don't want to get electrocuted. I want to get this shot out in the water. Let's just use a reflector. I had my iPhone in a water protected case and I went out there and I got the shot. So let's show the before shot. The before shot with the sun behind. You can see that she's clearly underexposed and very, very, very dark. Now the next shot shows adding a reflector, and I'm telling the subject, can you just kind of position this reflector where you can feel this light coming in onto your face? And so we're using the gold side here to kind of warm it up. And so she's positioning the reflector and have another person holding it. And, you know, those waves are moving around. So it wasn't quite the easiest thing, but we wanted to get this shot. And so sometimes you just got to do it. So she went out there holding the reflector, and the next shot shows that I just took my iPhone and took that photo. That looks completely amazing just using your iPhone and a simple reflector. I have that sun coming behind my subject, and so it can hit that reflector and light up my subject. This next photo of these two guys in this kind of working on their car scene, stylized shoot, and they were in the shade. And in order for me to get a little bit of light on them, now if you look at the first gentleman leaning on the car, you can see a catch light in his sunglasses to get a clue of what was his lighting. And it was a big board with aluminum on it, acting as a huge reflector to light both of them. And so they had lights coming in from behind him, both of them, and they had a big reflector to push light back into them, and the reflector was on the ground, light giving them some nice uplight. You don't have to use your traditional reflector. In this next photo, I use flowers as my reflector. So the sun is coming in behind the subject, and you can tell that is because look at the nice little highlight that's around her hair. So that sun is behind. I had her place those flowers close to her face because the flowers acted as my reflector to light up her face. So you can be creative. Whatever's light colored, you can use as a reflector, and it doesn't really have to be per se a reflector. It could be flowers, or it could even be a shoot-through umbrella. Whatever is light colored can act as a reflector. In this case in point, in the next photo, I'm actually using a wall. I didn't have anything else. I got this wall here, and let me try to create a nice little catch light with it. The light is coming in from behind her, and you can tell that that's the case because you can see her hair has some highlight on it. That light is hitting the wall and creating that nice little catch light in her eye. When you see the sun shining brightly on a wall, that is a great way to use the wall as a reflector. Of course, using a colored wall will create colored light on your subject, so I tend to pick walls that are neutral in color when I do this technique. This wraps up the section on how to use a reflector, and there's many ways to do it. You can use a wall, you can use a shoot-through umbrella, you can use a real reflector, but it is a great technique in harsh sun to put the sun behind the subject and then reflect light back on your subject to get a great shot. Let's now talk about diffusing the light. So when there's very, very harsh sun, you may want to put something in between the sun and your subject. If you put a diffuser over it, it will even out the light and take away some hot spots. Let's take a look in this next photo. And the situation here was I had my subject, part of her body was in the shade and part of her body was not. And she had hot spots on her shoulder. So what I did was I put the diffuser above her, so when the sun was shining on her, it will eliminate those hot spots and give me some beautiful, even lighting. And so you can see in this photo how even that lighting is, but in real life, that it was in an area where there was some very harsh light with hot spots. Now I want to go to my next photo, and you can see some shade behind him. What is creating that shade? Above him is a huge diffuser, and you can see that soft light coming down on him, creating some beautiful light. On this particular photo, we had to do two things. One, it was very, very bright. It was like noon. So that light was the sun was very high. So we had to, one, use a diffuser to create that beautiful downlight, but also I had to use a reflector to get that light back into his eyes. So I'm using a diffuser and a reflector on this particular shot, but it's all natural light.